we're talking about this because there's a stigma if you need help. The story is that you're beyond the help of most people around you. You need to get professional help.
Mm-hmm. When you use the word stigma, that seems like that's imposed from the outside. That's a societal judgment, or are you talking more about the internal stigma, the internalized version of that, or both?
That's a good point. It's almost like to reach out for some kind of help outside your small circle of family or friends, to feel like you need more help than you can get from them. It's been internalized. That must mean there's something really wrong with me. And so you don't even go there.
Right.
I need more help than my family and friends alone. Puts a pretty bad self-label on people, like, well, that means I'm really edging on being mentally ill or sick.
So there's an outside imposed judgment, which is an external stigma, which then gets internalized and becomes shame.
Right. And it's different here in northern latitudes in Montana, and it was very similar in Maine. And I think it's partly because the stock of human beings here is tougher by necessity, because it's a geographical place where you have to pay attention to what's going on or you'll freeze to death during the winter.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a good thing. I mean, it says a lot. The downside of it is, if people internalize or have internalized, if I need any more help than what I'm getting from my family and friends, then there's something wrong with me. Rather than, oh, right, these are human problems. They're not about mental illness. They're about being a human being.
Mm-hmm.
And a human being in a time when families have broken down, communities have broken down, the internet has taken over, and there's all this wanting to look good on social media. And whether you buy into that or not, it's out there. You're supposed to look good. Be happy, have that wonderful whatever. And so if you need something, you're a failure. Instead of, oh, yeah, it's normal to need things from other people.
So is it different in the North around needing help in general? Because there's a high value placed on that strong, can-do, hands-on ability?
Well, it's kind of a weird thing, right? Because there are situations where it's fine to need help.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when the calves need to get branded,
mm-hmm.
people come and help.
Right.
And, they get a few beers or something in exchange. But needing personal, like, guidance or mentoring, it either says there's something wrong with your family or your community that you don't already have that, or there's something wrong with you. And maybe there's nothing wrong with either one. It's just that we have, the last couple of generations has hit on harder times in terms of the rate of change in the world, the amount of difficulty out there, the drugs, the alcohol addiction, that it's a hard world to sort everything out in. And then with economic factors, the fears about wild fluctuations in the economy, there's so many difficulties in regular life now, I think.
So it's okay to need help on calf branding day. It's okay to need help if your vehicle is broken down and you need to take it to a mechanic.
Right.
But needing help in your relationship or your communications or
Right.
something, that's different. That's more shameful. Why is that more shameful? Why is that harder?
Because it seems like you're just supposed to know it because you got born.
Mm-hmm. I mean, why are relationship problems embarrassing? Why is it embarrassing to be in a relationship that's not working well or something?
Well, the first thing that comes to me is then somebody's failed.
Mm-hmm.
Either my partner has failed and I feel ashamed that I chose that partner,
Mm-hmm.
or I have failed because I'm not getting through to my partner, or I'm wanting too much from my partner. There's somebody's failing here instead of, oh, we're in a learning curve and that's normal.
But people don't have that sense of failure when their calves need to be branded
No.
because it's a huge thing you can't possibly do by yourself.
Right.
But people don't have the sense of failure when their diesel engine exploded. It's a huge thing. It needs a really smart person to deal with.
Right.
Right? So there's no sense of failure, but a relationship,
Right.
which is way harder than, I'm just going to say, way harder than branding calves or fixing a diesel engine. A
Well,
good relationship.
it is way harder.
I've never fixed a diesel engine.
And I've never branded a calf, so
That's
I
right.
have no idea if that's really true.
Right. So we've seen very little modeling of good relationships. We got very little instruction or training anywhere along the line.
Yeah. I remember there was a time after my first husband and I split up when I sat and thought, who has a relationship in the community that I would really like to have? And I came up with one example. They were 80 years old. I was like, are you kidding me? And I looked around and I said, no, I don't like how they get along, and they obviously haven't worked through stuff, and I don't like how she treats him, or I don't like how he treats her.
Right.
And that was really sad to realize that that there wasn't anything I really wanted to emulate out there. There were aspects of people's relationships, but I could only look at this one couple that were so dear to each other and seemed to pay such good attention and be on so much the same page.
Right.
And they were 80, for Christ's sake. I don't think people know it's normal. That what's normal is it's not easy.
It wasn't just that we had a lack of good role models to see.
Right.
It was also, we saw lots of crap. This society-wide, we're sitting on many generations of abuse and neglect and outright fighting and tearing down and beating up, and so is it even possible to have a really good, close connected relationship?
Right. Is it even on the menu?
Right.
Right. And so a lot of people go, well, if we're not beating each other up emotionally, if we've kind of figured out you're responsible for this and you're responsible for this, and we maybe share some things that are pleasurable in bed or at the dinner table and occasionally out with friends, that's good enough. That's
Mhm.
all. I can't expect any more than that, and she's not coming home dead drunk and he's not out with his friends partying, then be grateful. And there's truth in that.
Yeah.
Be grateful for what you got.
Right.
But the bar has gotten really low or started really low. I mean, my parents they stayed together their whole lives, but it wasn't anything I wanted to emulate.
Mm-hmm. And then we add to that by taking counseling or relationship help or mental health help and putting it into a profession, right? So that makes
Yes.
it hidden and cryptic and esoteric and
Yes, and I need to hide this
Yeah.
because this is somebody I can talk to who is legally bound not to gossip.
right.
So, and because there's so much shame around needing help, that's the person to go to. Don't want to talk about it with anybody else.
Rather than it just being a conversation in the community. Where people in your church are talking about relationships and your friends are talking about relationships and sharing how it's not working and how it is working. And
Right. And people to go to and say, how do we navigate this? And somebody to go to, a grandmother, and say, Grandma, can we sit and talk with you and just explain how we're stuck?
mm-hmm.
And there'd be a wise old woman or a wise old man saying, yep, that's how marriages are, and this is what you got to do.
Right.
You got to walk away when you're angry.
Right.
You can't beat each other up. That's not going to work.
Right.
So walk away when you're angry and say, I'll be back in an hour. I'm going to go figure my stuff out. Yeah, there's nobody to help like that available for most people.
Right.
A handful of people have that, and it's great. What we're doing here is stigma busting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Busting up the stigma.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's also a good idea for us particularly to say we're not mental health professionals.
Mm-hmm.
That's not who we are anymore.
No.
I used to be
right.
a therapist who gave diagnoses when I had to for people's insurance and all of that. And I kind of left that all behind, partly because I didn't see it was helpful, except it helped the insurance company.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you get 5 sessions, and then you have to write a report, and we're not only going to pay this much. I mean, it was nuts.
Mm-hmm.
So I just left that whole system a long time ago, but I really left the system when I realized most of this, not all, but most of this is just human problems. They shouldn't be pigeonholed into a diagnosis. Most everything people would come into the office over the last 20 years for me, they were just having human problems. They weren't sick. They didn't have a mental disorder. They didn't have crazy chemicals, other than the chemicals that just come as a result of being very stressed. But that's normal. That's not pathology. That's not sick.
Right.
Yeah.
What's that book title? We've had 100 years of
psychotherapy, and the world's getting worse.
Right. So, which doesn't speak too well to the model then that we're using to consider relationships.
Right. Right. Relationships, or even just one's own personal growth. It needs to be much more, you're basically really okay, and you've learned some things that don't work, and you haven't been given skills that do work. And so, yeah, let's talk about it. Let's just lay it out there. There's nothing to be ashamed of here.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's been mystified and medicalized.
Right.
And people have been taught to feel shameful if they're not masters of something they've never been trained in.
Right.
And who does that serve?
Yes.
And it serves a lot of industries.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. Human problems have become an industry. How shame on that in our culture.
Right.
Not on the individual. Shame on the culture
for
making human problems be something that get diagnosed and treated with pharmaceuticals. I want to add to that, nobody's talking about it. I have heard this many therapists ever address this, that this has been a professionalized thing that should never have been professionalized.
Right.
Like I said, of course, it's not everything and everybody. There are some people that need specialized care. In my ideal world, or my more ideal world, there would be a circle of community and family where there are friends to go talk to that actually have wisdom and skill, and or family members that actually have wisdom and skill. And there's just not enough of that. And so it gets farmed out. Yeah.
Farmed out?
Farmed out. Right.
Right.
Exactly. Part of that's from the outside world. It's getting crazier and crazier. We weren't set up for this. I didn't get learn skills in school or from my family. Oh, this is how you live in an uncertain economy with uncertain political and social conditions and things that look really bizarre to you.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody trained me for that,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and so it's been really hard for people, both individuals, but I think also in families and in couples. Hard to know how to be with each other. And who wants to just sit around and complain all the time? Nobody. Just complaining doesn't do it. So, what's the resolution?
So if we started just talking about this as a training situation, so relationships are failing because we've been very poorly trained and we've had our heads stuffed with a lot of unhelpful narratives and stories and beliefs and expectations.
Yeah, good point.
So then
we've been actually anti-trained by the media about what a good relationship looks like.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
So then it just seems like the antidote to stigma is group work. I go to group work, and of course I show up with all my fear and my wanting to look good and my, trying to run my show, put on my best act and whatever. But, it's always astonishing to me and then ultimately comforting and life-changing to just find out I'm in a room full of people who all have the same stuff going on inside that I do, who all have the same questions and situations and relationships that I do, that I'm not alone. I'm not the one sole broken failure person in the world, and everybody else is actually doing as well as they pretend to be. That in fact, we're all just, what was that Fire Sign Theater? We're all just bozos on the bus. That we're all, this is just the human condition, Yeah. So, and you get, when you do group work and it gets safe enough that people start showing up as themselves. And then you just realize, oh, wow, we're all just experiencing the human condition, and we're not broken, and we're not uniquely broken. There's just something about that just goes right into you. It's like, it's not training like head work, memorize, these are the steps, got to follow the steps, got to do all that. It's just this life-changing realization that can happen in groups.
Right, and when that happens, it's like, if you don't have to hold back or cover up or hide from other people, then there's nothing to be ashamed of, and having a felt sense of that is what I call healing. That I'm okay. I'm not perfect. I have lots to learn, and I've got healing to do because I've been hurt, but that's normal. Like, makes it possible to have deep self-acceptance and dare I say, deep self-love. Respect for what one's been through.
Yeah.
Because other people have been through things, and we can listen and witness and relate and have respect for them, that this has all been hard and we haven't been trained or taught.
We're not broken. We're courageous. We're survivors.
Especially people who choose to go against the stigma and ask for help, and then, have the courage to show up with a mentor and say, I don't know what I'm doing. And you seem like you've got a little bit more together than I do. Or show up in a group that's saying, hey, we're going to cop to this. We need we need some help with this. So
Right.
much courage. So
Right.
great.
So the Brene Brown quote, everybody's got a story that will break your heart.
Right.
Well, some stories are just like obviously heartbreaking stories, horrible trauma and abuse, for instance.
Right.
But that doesn't actually take away from the fact that my seemingly lesser trauma broke my heart too,
That's right.
because there's as much threat to attachment in just when you're a kid and a bad interaction with your parents or something that conveys to you that they're angry at you. There's as much threat to attachment that as there is in the most horrible experiences that some people have.
Yeah. So unpack attachment, because that's sort of a code word between us, and it's kind of part of psychological talk that many people probably don't understand.
Mm-hmm. So what attachment theory grew out of? Initially, it grew out as a way to describe mother-infant bonding relationships, right?
Right.
So how new babies attach to mothers, how toddlers attach that relationship. They called it an attachment relationship, and they began looking at different styles of attachment. You know, what happens when that relationship is broken or twisted or thwarted in some way, and eventually researchers began to see how attachment styles and the attachment that one has as a kid stays with us our entire life and is as important in a primary relationship or maybe lots of adult relationships
Yeah.
as it is in any mother-infant relationship.
Right.
The threats to attachment, how they show up in your brain, how they are just as painful, how they are just, they're like an existential threat, as a so
Life and death.
Life and death. So that the pain you feel when in your primary relationship, when your partner does something or says something that threatens the relationship, is as strong and shows up in the same parts of the brain as somebody coming at you with a spear or a sword or something. That's the downside of it. The good side of attachment is that a good, strong, healthy attachment, secure attachment between people is what allows people then to gain in confidence, go out and explore the world, find out who they are, become themselves in the world.
Right.
All of that is deeply related to the sorts of attachments and having a strong attachment.
Right, exactly. And that happens to a greater or lesser degree growing up with first mother, then mother and father, and sibling group. I mean, if you feel like you've got a team that loves you and supports you unconditionally, isn't going to banish you,
Mm-hmm.
then that allows a person to internalize that. I'm good. I'm basically good. I'm basically competent, and then they can take risks out in the world.
So you see this with a baby taking his first steps, right? A few exploratory steps out into the world and then turn around,
fall down and crawl right back
into mama's arms,
Yeah.
and then a little farther and then right back into mama's arms or to another person. And you see it with older kids on a playground, right? They're going to go and explore something and then come back. Mom, did you see? Did you see?
Yeah, right.
Now I'm going to go up the slide. Wow, what? And up there, watch. Mom, get the attention,
Right.
Always back to that connection while exploring.
Right.
Back to that connection while exploring.
Right.
So for adults, what's that connection at home that allows either person in the primary relationship to go out into the world, to go do their job well, to show up at the meeting strong and powerful,
To
take on a new project, to be really strong and try out some new things in the world. It's the same thing. Coming home, I did this, getting support, getting encouragement, or just going and exploring the inner world.
Right.
It's not a playground. But it's this vast area of let me tell you about this thing that happened, or let me explore this feeling. But it's always includes checking back to your attached person that's safe and secure and gives you enough sense that you're not alone,
Right.
that you can go off and do this work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes a huge difference. The most effective kind of couples counseling it's been researched and developed. So this woman, Sue Johnson, brilliant, loving couples therapist, developed what's called emotion-focused therapy. And the reason it's called emotion-focused is because it's at that level of feeling either emotionally bonded to somebody. And the way that people bond is by sharing their deepest selves, which includes their most tender feelings. And when that begins to really gel with a couple, I mean, that's what happened for us in the early years. You had some kind of magic I'd never met before that made me able to really trust you and trust that I could be completely who I was. And I know I offered that to you as well. And we just kept taking more and more risks until we realized, oh, this person is not going to abandon me. They're not going to shame me. They're not going to judge me.
Mm-hmm.
We may have moments of fighting, not agreeing, getting triggered, but we always come back to each other and we always work it through. Nobody's just going to grit their teeth.
Mm-hmm.
That's not good enough for us. Anybody who's ever had a horrible fight with their partner knows it just takes over. It's so hard.
Right.
The pain is incredible. And the threat and then the loss of a primary relationship is just huge.
Yeah.
And it kind of derails everything else. You don't do as well at work. You don't do as well in other responsibilities. You're not as creative.
Yeah.
Makes more difference, I think the research says, to men than it does to women.
Mm-hmm.
After a divorce or a loss of spouse, men are more vulnerable to heart attacks, poor health, and they tend to get hooked up with another partner faster.
Mm-hmm.
Because they need that. And that, I think that's probably because women have more native ability and more social support to reach out when they need help than men do. So for men, that primary attachment is even more important. They haven't been supported to reach out. And so that person that they've finally been able to share much or all of who they are with becomes more and more important. So the paradox is, and the sad paradox is, so the very thing that men need is safe, secure attachment to at least one other person, hopefully more. But it's the thing they're set up to feel ashamed about needing.
Mm-hmm.
I have a lot of compassion for men around that. I know it's hard for men. And so the stereotype of a man who is in the process of a divorce or a separation is, they either have a rebound relationship immediately that doesn't work, or they start partying hard in order to distract themselves from this horrible loss. Whereas women, I think, tend to kind of hunker down with a few friends and family and get more support. So it's much harder on men. The good thing is,
we buy a motorcycle.
Even better.
So
Get the motorcycle.
so that difference between men and women, if I'm allowed to use those terms, that difference could be largely acculturated, largely taught, right? The fact that it's harder for men is because the acculturation of men is really different in terms of seeking help, expressing feeling,
Right.
all of that. When you've
Yeah.
got male culture that's got to do with stiff upper lip, be strong, be the protector,
Right.
get everything done, have all the answers, all of that, that can make it harder.
It's not to say there's anything wrong with men having a deeply felt sense of needing to be strong and protective.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've been exploring this over the last several years, just talking about all this gender stuff and how our relationship has deepened the more I've let myself depend on you and allow you to be strong for me because it fulfills a part of you. You never tried to get securely attached to your first wife. It wasn't on the menu for you.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't try to get securely attached to my first husband. It wasn't on the menu for me.
Mm-hmm.
Being two strong, independent individuals was what was on the menu. And then you got accused of being moody.
Mm-hmm.
And I got accused of being counter-dependent. And, those were just labels for me, it was, I'm afraid to trust anybody. But also, the less I trusted my first husband, the more he didn't feel good about himself. And the more he was dysfunctional. And it was just this self-reinforcing loop. I didn't say, I need you. I needed to step up here. And so he didn't. And it was like, well, Sally can take care of that. Sally can take care of that. Sally can take care of that. And it wasn't what he needed, and it wasn't what I needed either, but we didn't know how to do it any differently. And then on your side, you didn't know and disclose to your wife, hey, I need a place to really explore this inner stuff. You didn't know that was available.
Mm-hmm.
And it may not have been with her
Mm-hmm.
because she had difficulty in her childhood. She didn't want to unpack it either.
Mm-hmm.
So you reinforced each other in that. You go be moody and she can go be self-righteous or frustrated with you or whatever, rather than both people looking at each other and going, we've got needs here. So we didn't know how to establish a secure attachment. It just, by the grace of God, we figured stuff out early on, and then started exploring Sue Johnson's work, and it was like, wow, the lights really came on. Oh, everybody needs this.
Mm-hmm.
At least one other very secure emotional attachment. It's part of human being.
Yeah, the programming is really deep. I still feel squeamish regularly.
Yeah.
Around needing or feeling,
Yeah.
or I mean, the notion that I need to have a firm attachment, it's kind of like there's this squeamish feeling that happens inside, like that's what babies need, right?
Squeamish being kind of on the edge of feeling ashamed, like that's not okay.
Yeah. And
yet both of us, having having created a very securely attached relationship, have been able to do things we never could have done on our own.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like what we're doing is saying things that most people never hear. It's normal. It's not pathological. You're not mentally ill if you need help.
Mm-hmm.
It's normal to need help specifically with relationships because there are so few to even look at as examples, and then we don't see the inner workings of how the people who have a really good relationship got there. Nobody talks about it. And then nobody talks about how lost they are and how they're doing their best, and they even know their partner's doing their best. But so part of what we're trying to do is say it out loud. It's okay. It's normal. It's not pathological. Part of my vision is that we create a community full of caring, loving elders who have developed skills to help those around them, and that we take this out of the professional realm anyway.
Right.
We just, no, this is part of your birthright.
The problem with professionalism is it confers status.
Status,
status,
superiority.
Status sets us up for superiority.
And
Yeah.
us having to cover up when we're hurting.
Yeah.
We're not allowed.
Yeah.
We go somewhere else with that, not to our community.
Right.
Yeah. The hierarchical. That's one of the problems with having really strict hierarchies. People on top suffer just as much as the people down in the crowd suffer.
Right.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Are we done?
We're done for today.